The first thing I usually like to show in a TAGGIT training here is how you deal with the printers, how you manage printers in the software. And printers in the old software, you may have been familiar with it, but you went to File and select Printer in the software, and that brought up a window here that you clicked Install to get into and install printers. Now, really, for the most part, it's very similar in the new version of the software. In the new software, it's still File and select Printer. We have, instead of a little drop-down list of printers, of currently installed printers, we actually have a list here of the currently installed printers. So you're really kind of seeing the same screen that you saw before, except instead of a drop-down, you're seeing a list. All right, so if we want to add a printer, all you have to do is click the Add button versus what it used to be called as the Install button. Install we thought was kind of misleading because you might not necessarily be installing a printer. You're adding it to be able to use it in the software because you can add a printer even if it's not necessarily attached to your computer. So when you click Add, you get a list of all the printer manufacturers in here, and this is where it gets to be a little similar to the way it was in the old version of the software. You just get a list of all the manufacturers. So let's say we scroll down here to SATO. Where is it there? SATO, and we can expand SATO and find our, maybe it's a 412 or 412E or something like that that we have and when we want to print to. All you do is select the printer that you want to add. You select the port that you want to connect it to. Now you can see here this is a list of all the local ports that are installed on this computer. Quite a few COM ports installed as local ports on this machine. But you see IP ports and USB ports and things like that all available in here. Now you do notice there are buttons down here for adding network printer and TCP IP ports right through the software. That's something that wasn't really available in the old software. But you can still do it in the software. We don't really recommend doing it that way. And the main reason for that is because of this little checkbox down here that says Direct Access. And what that means is that when we print to the printer, it's going to send it straight to the printer. The software sends right down straight to the printer, direct communication. And while that might seem like a good idea, there are some pretty strong drawbacks, and the biggest one is the fact that if something goes wrong on the printer, somebody accidentally unplugs it or pulls out the network cable or whatever it might be, the printer goes unavailable. There's no way for the software directly to know that something went wrong. So when we uncheck that direct access, we enable the use of Windows print spooling, which means we send the job to Windows and Windows sends it down to the printer. And then the printer can actually be monitored and checked to make sure that it's available. If something goes wrong, Windows can stop and hang on to things. And as soon as that printer is back available, it picks right back up where it left off and keeps printing. Now, what does that have to do with these buttons? Yes, you can add these ports right through the software, but if you do that, it's essentially like adding them with the direct access checkbox checked. And if you want to get that buffer or that shock absorber against issues that happen, you'd want to add the port as a local port in Windows, which can just be done through printers and faxes and adding, or devices and printers, whichever operating system you're in, and adding it as a local Windows port. And that'll make it show up in this list, and all you have to do is select it and, well, uncheck direct access if need be, and then click OK. So in all, that's a lot of information, but really all we did was pick the printer we want to use, pick the port we want to print to, and uncheck direct access if you don't want to use that, and hit OK. And that's it. So literally 3 clicks, you got a printer installed. So there it is. You see the little printer icon indicating that it is in fact a TAGGIT driver. It's a driver meant to work specifically in TAGGIT. And the printer is ready to be used. If you needed to get in and make changes to the driver, similar to what you might have done in the old software. So in the old software, we would have gone to Edit and Label Setup. From here, we could go to the Options tab here, and there's Settings here. And then if you were using an extended driver, you would have a Settings button that you could click into and get into some advanced settings. Now, being under Label Setup, sure, that's, I guess, an okay place to have it, but it's a little misleading. Under here, right under the printer window, we have a Settings button right here. So right after you add the printer, you can go in and make changes to those printer settings. So if it's what kind of stock you're using, the temperature, the print speed, whatever it might be, all these settings are right here readily available. So a strong correlation to how you used to manage printers in the old software, but rather than having the things broken up into 2 different locations, one under File and Select Printer and one under Edit and Label Setup, we've got everything right in one spot, right under the File and Select Printer window. Now, once you've got the printer selected and, installed and the settings defined, all you have to do is highlight it and click OK. And that printer is now selected, and the label you're designing will be designed specifically for that printer. So printer is actually very, very easy, usually about 3 clicks to be able to add through the software now. Before, it wasn't a complex process, but it wasn't exactly the most logical in comparison to, say, something like this, where everything's in one place. Now, the other aspect, of course, when we were in the old software, we went to that edit and label setup, we get that label setup screen. Well, it's the same thing as it is in the new software, except instead of being under edit now, which I don't really know why that was under edit in the first place, it's under the file menu right next to the printer options. So you have the select printer and you see label or page setup. So because we might not just be talking about an individual label, we could be talking about a sheet of labels or multiple labels across. We have label or page setup. We do that, we get a relatively similar screen. The old software had many of the settings here. You have an options tab, a password tab, a label description tab. Many of the same common sort of ideas here. There's a stock tab that we start out on, which means if you have a predefined stock, if you know who makes your label stock, if you know you're using a Brady THT stock or something like that, you could come in here and choose the part number of the stock that you're using. And there, you're done. It takes care of everything for you. Now, if you don't know the stock that you have, or if it's not listed in here, because of course we'll never have everything in here, you can go ahead and set it up manually. Setting up manually means starting off on the label tab and defining how big a single label is. A single label, let's say I have 4 by 6 inch label stock. I have a 4-inch width and a 6-inch height. And then I could define corner roundness and how many labels across I have, or how many labels down if I'm talking about a sheet of labels. But in my case, I'm saying I only have 1 label across, and so I can set that to 1 and 1. You'll notice in the little preview over here, there's a red line indicating, hey, there might be something not quite right here, and it actually says the width creates a problem. So that means that there's something else that needs to be addressed to make sure that everything's set up correctly. With the old software, there was nothing to indicate that there was really something wrong, which kind of made it hard to troubleshoot whenever there was something wrong with printing. If you move on over to the Page tab, you get options here for automatic sizing, which means you can automatically have it trimmed down to be the size of your label or your tag, and any margins that you have. It'll take it all into account and just trim everything down for you. Or you can do it manually and define the width and height of the overall size of the entire stock. So if you're dealing with multiple tags and multiple labels across, you can define that here. And then lastly, of course, are margins. If you do have a top or a left margin defined, you can define that here. Otherwise, you can either zero it out if you don't need it, or you can say printer default, which means it'll look at this particular printer and find out what kind of margin this printer usually needs. In this case, SATO CL412E doesn't actually need to have a margin of any kind, so when we check that, it trims everything off. And we get a nice clean preview of a 4-inch wide and 6-inch label there, so everything looks good to go. Now, one other thing I do want to point out, in the old software, you did have the option to go into Edit and Label Setup, and when you were in the Label Setup, you could go into those printer settings if you wanted to. That was on that Options tab. So over here, the Options tab, there were those printer settings. That same exact thing exists down here with the little Settings button. So we click that Settings button, and it shortcuts us right back to that Settings window we saw on the print screen. So whereas there was only really one way to get to it before, now you have it right there when you add the printer, and you have it when you're setting up the label. So just trying to give more options, more resources to people to be able to get access to the features that they commonly need to use. But there we go. We've got our label defined. I can hit OK here, and it actually should pop up and ask me if I want to save this. What this means is on the Stock tab, I could have set up a custom name and save this as a predefined stock. If I say yes, it would try to save it. Now, unfortunately, since I didn't change the name right now, it's asking me if I want to overwrite the stock that's already there. And obviously here, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to say no. But you can save that stock, so it's an easy reference, even if we don't have it automatically loaded into the software. So there we go. We got our 4-inch wide, 6-inch tall label, or if it was a tag, it maybe be a little bit smaller, whatever it might be. And we can start talking about design. Now, design's really kind of the meat and potatoes of everything here, and in the old software, everything was kind of jumbled into one place. When we're talking about design, we're talking about two aspects. We're talking about the things that we can add to the label, things like text fields and paragraph fields, barcodes, be it the linear, HIBC, or two-dimensional barcodes, pictures, lines, shapes, all those things. And then when we add something like maybe a text field, we had options in here to choose different data sources. And the data sources we have fixed when printed, linked, databases, date stamps, time stamps, and things like that. Now, that made it a little hard, a little confusing to see what was going on, especially when you were talking about variable information. So when we made the new software, we made it so that you not only had the ability still to be able to add these text, barcodes, pictures, lines, all that stuff, but then when you were talking about data sources, you had the ability to not only add them when you're adding the field, but you can also add them independently and manage them independently. And that's what this data sources window is over here. Now, if you don't have this data sources window on your screen when you open up by default, you can go to View and Data Sources, and that'll turn it on. Or in this case, I click it and it turns it off. But the key is View and Data Sources to bring up this Data Sources window, because it is really quite valuable, because you have a nice quick reference to any sort of variable information that you're using on your label. So if you're using a database, or you're using a date stamp, or perhaps a counter that's incrementing a serial number or something like that, you don't have to go into the text field to get in and manage that variable. And in addition to that, you don't have to use linked expressions to link together one. So say you have a text field that has your part number in it, but you also have a barcode that has your part number. Previously, you had to create a linked expression to link those two together. You don't have to do that anymore. There's an easy drag and drop interface. And I'll show you that here in just a minute, but to start off with, I want to show you how we handle these objects, these text fields and barcodes and images and things like that. So now, the first thing I want to point out to you here is if you look here, it looks like there's significantly less buttons as it pertains here, but then kind of like a lot more down here in comparison to what we have on the toolbar in the old software. And the key point here is, if you'll notice, there's not only a text box, but then there's a paragraph box, or a button. Those two ways of doing the same thing. It just depended on whether or not you had one line or multiple lines. Same things for these barcodes. There was the linear barcodes and HIBC barcodes, and then two-dimensional barcodes. And they're all barcodes. So why do we have separate buttons for every single one of those things? And then there's a picture, and then the lines. But the lines, kind of not all that much diversity in the shapes that you can add here. When we come over to the new version of the software, we said, okay, having all that stuff broken out like that doesn't make any sense. A text field is a text field. So if you're adding text, it doesn't matter if it's a single line or if it's multiple lines, it's text. So it's one button to handle all of that. Same with barcodes. Is it a linear barcode? Is it a specifically formatted barcode like a GS1 standard barcode or a HIBC barcode or whatever it might be? Or is it a two-dimensional barcode? It doesn't matter. They're all barcodes. So everything's in one place, so it's an easy, quick, one-click option to be able to add any of those types of barcodes. Pictures, yeah, of course, that's there. But then we have all the shapes and things like that we can add here. Lines, rectangles, ellipses, polygons, multi-click polygons, oblique lines, and even rounded rectangles. So more diversity in the shapes and objects that you can add to the label. So let me start off by talking about the first one here, which is adding text to the label. And really, this is kind of the where we start to get into some of the real strong benefits of the new software versus the old software. Now, if we were going to add text in the old software, we would click the letter A button or the paragraph button, depending on which one we're going to use. And we're given a box that says, okay, figure it out. What font do you want? What height do you want? And a text string. There's really not all that much here, not all that much diversity that you can do in this one screen. And even if there was more diversity, it would get really confusing, because there's options tab here, and you may or may not know what these options do on this options tab, and the color for what color you want to use, not a whole lot of flexibility there, but there's nothing really help guide you through these things, and that's the big, I guess, feature or the big help in the new software. Now, if you look at this letter A, if you look closely, there's actually two sides to it. The left side, if we click on it, actually highlights the button, and you'll notice that my cursor actually changes. Now my cursor is a little letter A with a magic wand next to it. I guess a pointer with a letter A and a magic wand. A magic wand means wizard. So if I click right now, a wizard's going to launch and help walk me through the addition of text. And while you might right away say, why do I need something to walk me through adding text? That's a valid point in some cases. Say, for instance, I don't want to use the wizard. If I don't want to use the wizard, I can actually hold the Shift key on my keyboard, and that makes the wizard go away. Now, if I click on the label, it drops text, and I can type whatever I want. So I can type hi there. And this is kind of the point. Okay, I can easily add text if I want to, but now that's not the prettiest looking text in the world. If I want to change the text, I can right-click on it and go into the properties, or double-click on it and go into the properties, and there's a whole world of options in here. There's a general tab with general settings like position, size, how we want to handle rotation, anchor points, all sorts of options here for handling the positioning and the location and the management, general management of the field. Then there's the fonts and the sizes, the styles, all that stuff. Paragraph properties, because it could be multiple lines of text. If it's a paragraph, you got to address the alignment that you want. If you want it to automatically fit the frame, if so, is it a justified top, middle, bottom? How far is the space between each line? Should the text automatically wrap to the next line? All sorts of options in here. Shape options, shapes are really not all that applicable in this case, but if you want, say, like a background or a border color for the text, you can do all that here. Lots of options in here, but that's kind of the problem. We want to give you all this flexibility and functionality, but it can tend to be a bit confusing if you want to just dive right in. So alternatively, we have the wizard, which if you add text like this, you can right-click on it and go to wizard and just launch the wizard. Otherwise, I can just click the button. Well, actually, I should show you here. I can click the right side, and it gives me a drop-down, which is saying literally what I just said, the fixed text without the wizard, using the wizard. And then there's data source options if you wanted to add, say, a date stamp or a when printed field or whatever right through this feature. No, that's just like we could in the old software. If you were adding a text field, you could right away, right in that text field, say you want to make it a date stamp or you want to make it a counter. And you can still do that. But there's a lot more management options for those variables. So I'm going to focus on fixed information for now and then show you how we can do these variable stuff in a minute. So we've got the wizard here. If I choose the wizard and click, up comes this nice little wizard to help walk us through things. So the wizard starts off with a simple screen saying, okay, what kind of data source do you want variable information? Do you have an existing variable you want to use, or do you want to create a new variable? And that's, again, a data source. So if you have a counter or a when printed field or a date stamp that you want to reference, you can easily right there. But like I said, I'm sticking with fixed stuff, so type hi there again. And you can see a nice little preview of how it's going to look. You can actually see it showing up in the background too. And then a little summary of the current font. And it's just a summary telling you what it is right now. It's not actually editable there. If we go to the next screen, we're taken to a screen that says, come on. Waiting for it to update. I think it's got a little delay here. Whoa. Not sure what happened there. I'm not sure if this is something I can't click on because I'm remotely controlling this or not. Can you click on that, Kevin? That's interesting. Let's try this. Oh, wow. All right. Well, that's fun. Let's try and bring that back up again. I'm not sure what happened there. I can tell you that's not normal behavior for the wizards. Wizards are usually very, very smooth here and very helpful. I'm wondering if the remote session here is giving us some trouble with the animations that occur. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and quickly turn off the animations in the wizards so that we don't run into that. And find wizards. Where is that option? I think it's right under the main screen here. Under display. There it is, activate animation effects. Turn that off, and hopefully that's just what's causing a problem here. Sometimes the change in the display interface gives us a little bit of confusion. Let's try that again. All right, so all I did here was type in hi there, and then if I hit next, there we go. We get fonts, and just like in the old software, we still have two different types of fonts. We have printer-resident fonts and graphic fonts. The printer-resident fonts are, of course, dependent on which printer you have selected. And then the graphic fonts, which are kind of like all those other fonts we're used to seeing, Arial, Times New Roman, things like that. You have size and width percentage and foreground and background and style information, all stuff that we would have seen in the old software too. And then, again, because we could be talking about a paragraph's worth of information, we've got alignment options here. How we want it aligned, the line spacing, the rotation of the field, word ramp, fit to frame, all those things that we saw in the properties window. But the wizard's kind of like putting them out there for you so you can not only enable it, but then see a quick preview of the result that happens when you enable it. Plus down here we have position information, so I could say I want it right at 1 inch by 1 inch. And when I hit finish, you can see it's showing up right at 1 inch by 1 inch. So that's a text field. Now, you might say, okay, yeah, that was a lot of clicks to do a single text field. Yes, but it was able to get us the specific text field that we wanted, the exact format that we want. And once we've gotten it the way we want, we have the ability to right-click on the field and say, set this as the default. And that means going forward, any text fields that I add, even if I don't use the wizard, will add it with that exact same format. So the wizard's a great tool to help guide you through at least initially learning and initially creating your field in the exact format you need. And that right-click and set as default option, that's available on any object that you add. So even if you add a picture, if you define how the picture adds, you can set it as a default so it always adds that way. Right? In addition to that, if you got through this and you decided, hey, I didn't see all the options I needed, you again could go back into properties, or if you want to, you can go back into the wizard and relaunch the wizard again. Just this time it's automatically populated with everything that you defined last time. So it'll help walk you through everything again. So that's a text field. The next one down here is barcode, same concept as a text field where the left side selects it and gives us the option for the wizards, right side gives us the drop down. And we see a couple more options down here, and these are actually wizards that are built into the software to, one, here's the HIBC, which was in the old software, but other options like MaxiCode barcodes or GS1 barcodes. There's wizards in the software to help build those things now, whereas there weren't previously. Whether or not that's of value or not, maybe for you, maybe not. But otherwise, it's still there just in case you want it. Unfortunately, because of our time constraints, not enough time to go through those individually. But I do want to show you how this barcode wizard by itself works. So say right here, I'm going to add a barcode. We've got our different symbology types, a whole array of different kinds here, GS1 barcode standards, postal barcodes, standard linear barcodes. What do we got here? Two-dimensional barcodes, things like QR codes and things like that. And then composites, which are kind of a blend between 2D and linear. So say, for instance, I want to do just a standard linear barcode. Yeah, I'll stick with a code 39, pretty standard. And if you look close here, you can actually see there's both printer resident and then graphic barcodes, just like fonts. Old version of software, there was no way to specifically define that. You couldn't say, hey, I want to make sure I'm using a barcode that's supported by the printer. Now we have the ability to display that and easily reference that. So in this case, code 39, it's printer resident code. I can choose a data source if I want. I can enter in the data that I want. So there's some information. If I need a check digit, I can define that here. If I want to make a customized human readable, I could do that. I can say I don't want a human readable at all. If I go to custom, if I hit next, I'm taken to a screen that says, okay, you want to customize your human readable? Sure, you can do that if you want, or you can usually say generate by the printer, and it'll make sure that you only add a human readable that's supported by the printer to make sure that it remains a printer resident barcode. But otherwise, you can get it as customized as you want. You could do, Arial or even Cabrilli or Wingdings if you want to, and make it bold, italic, whatever you want. From there, we can go to the next tab, and we're given options for position, size, rotation, and then ratio if you're using a barcode that pertains to bar width ratios. Now, if we click back here and go back to that first screen, and instead of choosing customize, we choose what's it called, default. When we hit next, it skips that customized screen and takes us right to the end, which is the position and size information. So click finish. There we go, as easy as that. It's basically just click add, type in your information, choose your barcode type, and hit finish, and you get that barcode. So, but that is, it's as easy as that for barcode enter generation. So let me go ahead and pull these off of here so I get some more real estate. Next option down is adding a picture. Just like in the old software, it's pretty much the same thing, with the exception that the old picture screen wasn't all that great. In addition to the fact that you were kind of locked into a specific location, you had to save the pictures in a specific folder in order for them to show up in this in this window, in this drop-down. You could enable a preview, but it was kind of tiny and it wasn't all that useful. If we instead come over to the new software and use the wizard to add, sorry about that, 1 second here, just having a delay in everything I'm doing. Oh, it doesn't like that I left this window open. Come on. Oh, I'm clicking the wrong one. That's my problem. Okay. Come on now. All right, so adding a picture here, just like before, left side selects, right side gives a drop down. I'm just going to select it right away and add it to the label. And when we do use the wizard for adding a picture, it gives us a much bigger preview, variable options here if you want to, but more importantly, one, you can choose from a gallery of preloaded symbols if they're of use to you. Warning signs, symbols, arrows, things like that. Otherwise, you can, right now it's looking at the default folder, but you could browse to and select any folder on the computer that you want to look at. And you browse to that folder and choose it. It's going to scan that folder, and it's going to result in any picture files in this little thumbnail format, which then you can pick and choose whichever one you need. Say I need that calf nut connector, and it's going to show up on a big preview here. From there, I can hit next to go through some minor other changes. We have options for effects like brightness, contrast, gamma, negative, horizontal, vertical flipping, even the color palette that can be used. And we have rotation and resizing options here. So do we want it to stretch and squeeze the image, or do we want it to just get bigger and smaller? So it keeps the original aspect ratio, just gets bigger and smaller. Or do we not want it to resize at all? We want the original size. I usually go with zoom, just so the image doesn't get distorted in any way. But then position and size information for the actual box that contains the image in it. From there, hit finish, and there you go. There's an image, can be put on the label anywhere you want. You can see even if I make it an oblong size, it doesn't matter. It keeps the original proportions. All right, now from there, a lot of things are just kind of click and drag. We've got a line here, which draw a line if you want, draw a box if you want. Same thing for ellipse with, what are these, what are they called, polygons. You can click and click and click and click and double click to finish. Oh, didn't catch my double click there. There we go. And you got rounded rectangles and some specific shapes and symbols. You might want a lightning bolt or something like that. You can add in easily just by selecting it and placing it on the label. With all of these things, if you want to get specific, you can double click on it or right click and go to properties and you can get specific about, what color it is, how big it is, where it locates specifically. But what I usually recommend is saying, hey, you know what, I need this line to be showing up at 1 inch, and I need it to go all the way across the label. So I'm going to place this right about 1 inch, and then I'm going to drag this over to be almost as wide as the label. I get it close, I can come in here, go to the General tab, and I can say, okay, well, that's close to 0. I'm going to make it 0. That's close to 1. I'm going to make it 1. And that's close to 3. So I'm going to make it 3. Looks like the label is only 3 inches wide here. Oh, it's a little more than 3 inches wide. I'm not sure what that is. But you can see it, I get it close, and then I can define it easily to be exactly the size that I want. So for most of these, yes, you can get in there and do everything granularly, but usually the easiest way to do it is just click and drag. So now there are 2 last things down here called extended objects. Whether or not it's worth getting into them here in detail, one is text art, one is rich text fields. Now, I'm not even sure these were options in the old software. Oh, yeah, there were. Text art and rich text. I forgot about that. Same exact concept as it was in the old software. Text art means that you can wrap text around a circle if you wanted to. So here's my text. I'm going to tell it, hi there again, and a bunch of exclamation points. I can go into extended, and I can tell it to bend text to a shape. I can tell it where to start. I can tell it how far around it I want it to go. I can tell it how I want it to align, breaking of sharp edges and things like that. But then, of course, if I tell it to wrap to a shape, I need to tell it what shape I want it to wrap to. I'm going to tell it I want to wrap to an ellipse and hit OK. And there we go. We get our, kind of strange looking right now, but we get our text wrapped around an ellipse to make it look just like we see it there. So that's text art. And the other one is a rich text field, which is basically being allowed, we see it here, more than one style or font or size or whatever in a single text field. Now, there are ways to do this with a standard text field, but this gives you a bit more flexibility, especially if you want to do something like superscript characters. So I love H2O. Yes, it's a little weird, but it'll illustrate what I'm trying to say here. So maybe I need love underlined, and I need it to be red. So I'm going to choose red, and I need H2O to be italicized, and the 2 to be a subscript. All sorts of flexibility here with how we want these to display. But once you get it, you can hit OK, and then hit OK again, and boom, there you go. You get your specifically formatted text on the label in a box that you can resize and place wherever you need. So, but those are all the objects. Now, anything object-wise that you could do in the old software, you can definitely do in the new software. So it's just trying to illustrate there just a different way to do it. And really, when you utilize those wizards, it's really a really nice way to help walk you through how to do these things, make things a bit more intuitive and a bit easier to use. And those assistants, those tools to help you out with some of these objects weren't something available in the old software, and that's kind of the driving point, that there's these tools in here to help make things a little bit easier. So now we only have about 15 minutes left here, and I don't think that's enough time to go through all of these data sources. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on sort of the ones that I think might be most pertinent to you. Data sources are really, really useful, and to reiterate, they're pretty much the same thing that was in the old software. Let me kind of pull this a little bit smaller so that we can see in the background the new software versus the old one. If I say bring up a text field, and remember, I have to bring up a text field to be able to do this because this is the only way it was available. But if I want to do a when printed field, you can see when printed is right there. If I want to do a linked expression, well, linked expressions were kind of a misleading statement. You could do a lot more than just link 2 fields together, so we renamed it and called it a formula, because it really is a formulation or a formula calculation that you can do with an expression rather than just link 2 fields together. DBase, ODBC, and OLE were all different ways of saying the same exact thing. You want to connect to a database, and that's what this database option is. Then we have a date stamp and a time stamp, which, again, were two ways of saying the same thing. We have it listed as just date now. They do the same thing. Serial file was the only way that you could do a counter in the old software. You had to link to outside locations to be able to store a counter. You don't need to do that anymore. You don't have to depend on external files anymore, and that's where counters come into play. Counters are built in. You don't need to depend on anything externally. They just count and remember what you're doing. Accumulator files, pick lists. Pick lists are part of when printed fields. They're combined in there. Shift codes are available through a formula, and data dictionary was actually removed from the software altogether because pretty much nobody ever used it. But for the most part, these last three options in here, they are available through the software in some form or another, and in some cases, like ComWatch, it's kind of more of an enterprise level feature that was deemed a little outside of what the standard need is in something like TAGGIT. So that's actually no longer available in TAGGIT. And then the data dictionary feature, because it was really, really highly unused, that was also removed from the software, mainly because there was not really deemed any demand for it to ensure that it was in the new software when we invested the time in developing. So just to reiterate, all of those options there, they're basically condensed down and listed in this data sources list here. Now, the ones I think are really kind of important to focus on are going to be, 1, connecting to a database, 2, doing a date stamp, 3, a when printed field, and then if we have time, doing a counter as well. So now to start off with a database, that's kind of a big one. Now, if you don't know what a database is, the best way I could describe it to you would be an Excel spreadsheet. Now, an Excel spreadsheet isn't actually a database, it's a spreadsheet. But as far as the software is concerned, it's close enough. Really what the software is looking for is information broken up into columns and rows. As far as columns are concerned, they're fields on your label. If you have a part number column, that's a text field or a barcode on your label that represents part numbers. If you have a description column, same thing. It's a text field on your label that represents the description. In a database, each row is basically a label that's going to print. So if you go to print and you choose 3 rows in a database, you're going to get 3 labels, each label having the correlating information from that row. So databases, that's what they are. How do we connect to them? Now, like I said, in the old software, you had DBF, OLE, and ODBC all broken up, and that didn't really make any sense to us. Didn't see what was the point in doing that. Now, if you want to go through and you want to build an ODBC or an OLE connection manually, there's a couple ways you can do that in the software, but to make things easier, there's actually wizards in the software now. So now, if you have an ODBC or an OLE connection on your system from before that you were connecting to or that you built previously, it will be in this list, and you can just pick it. You can see there's a bunch of ones that are installed by default, and then there's even one I added briefly earlier. But if we want to add a new one, because you don't have a connection yet, all you have to do is hit the new button, and a nice little wizard pops up to help walk you through this. Now, there are built-in wizards to easily connect to Access databases, Excel databases, SQL servers, and Oracle servers. Now, or Oracle databases. If you have a database that's different than that, then you'd have to create a connection to it manually through either an ODBC or an OLE connection. A lot of people ask about DBF files. And DBF files are a very, very old format. They were what were in the software from years ago. They're not even technically supported by Microsoft anymore. So when we built wizards in the new software, we didn't build a wizard in for such an older format of the database type. Now, that doesn't mean you can't connect to them. And in fact, if you're converting labels from the old software to the new software, the converter will take care of creating the connection for you and automatically create the connection that you need to link your newly converted labels to that old DBF database. But if you're creating a new one, you might have to build it manually or use one of these nice wizards. Now, these Access and Excel, those are kind of the more common database types that people use nowadays. So say, for instance, I want to connect to an Access database. I just click on Access, and then I give it a name. So if I call mine the test connection, There we go. If I call it test connection, and then down here I can give it a little description if I want to, but I don't really need to. What a lot of people usually name it is the same name as the database. If you know the name of your database, say for instance, I'm gonna connect to a fittings database. I can call this connection fittings, so it's easy to know what this connection is referring to. I already have a fittings connection listed, so I don't want to create another one. But you could do that just to make sure you keep easy track of what this connection refers to. You give it a name, and then it says, okay, well, which database file do you want to connect to? Well, I want to connect to my sample fittings database here. But whatever your database file is, you just browse to it and select it, and then hit open. It's going to put the file, the field, I'm sorry, the path in there for you. And then if you have a username and password, which is specific to Access databases here, you can put it in there and test it. But since I don't have a password, when I test it, all's well. So everything's looking good. I can hit finish, and it creates my connection for you. You can see here it's in the list there. And the nice part is if I ever create another label that needs to connect to this database, I don't have to do that again. It's in the list. All I have to do is come down and select it. And once I select the connection, if I have multiple tables in my database, I might need to define that. In this case, I only have one table, so there's only one to select. But if you did have multiples, you could choose that here. And then, of course, if you're connecting to a database, you have to choose which columns or which fields you want to use on the label. Now, if you have 50-some fields, you could pick and choose the ones you want, or if you want all of them, like in my case, which I only have 5, I can hit select all. It chooses all of them. And then when we move on to the next tab, we get into kind of an area that might need a little bit of explaining. Now, because previously, when you built a field, when you created a text field, you had to, in that text field, define the variable. There was no way to create a variable without having it on the label. Well, so far, that's what we've done. We've created database variables, but they're not actually used on the label in any way. And that's what this screen is saying. Do you want to add it to your actual label by creating hosting objects or fields on the label that use those database variables? So say I want all my fields to be text. I can choose set as all as text, and it's going to set them all to text. Or I might want my part number to be a barcode. I might want my picture field to be an image. Whatever I might need. And pick and choose it, and then hit finish. It's going to do 2 things. It's going to, one, not only create the variables that I was talking about. You can see them over here, but it's also going to add them to my label. So here's the fields on the label, and I can move them, put them wherever I need them. So say, for instance, I need my barcode down here, and I need it a little bit wider. I need my description to be shown up here. I'm sorry, my picture field to show up there. I need my description up on top. Oop. Let me grab it here and drag it up. And then, this is my size here, so I'm going to click to the left of it and type size in there. And this is my quantity, so I can do the same there. And there, I've basically got all the components to make my label in just a few clicks. If you needed to add more fields, you could. Or if I realized, I have my part number in in barcode form, but I also need it in text form, I can just take part and drag it over and drop it on the label. When I drop it on the label, I can choose text, barcode, or image, whatever I want. I say I want it as text, and boom, there we go. Text field on the label with that number in it. If I were to go to print here, you can see the whole database listed here. I can pick and choose the field I want, and depending on which record I choose, it changes the label to display that information. So that's the value of a database, that easy, quick ability to pull in lots of information and automatically create fields on the label that provide that information. So, all right, well, now we only have a few more minutes here. I knew we weren't going to get through everything, but let's touch real quick on when printed fields, which a lot of people use. When printed fields are, of course, those fields that pop up at print time, or you want to type in something, and what you type in is what shows up on the label. So say, for instance, I want somebody to type in their first name. I'm going to right-click on that variable and say wizard. And when I do that, I can give the variable a name, something like first name, and then I can type in a prompt, something like enter your first name. Okay. And then if I want to, I can control what kind of data they put in, what types of characters, the minimum length and maximum length, and put in a sample. So I'll put in my name, Dave. And then if I hit next, I get options for the maximum length the field can be, if I want a prefix or a suffix on the field, if I want to pad the information. Maybe I need leading X's up to 10 characters. I can do that. Otherwise, I don't really need that, so just hit finish. And there we go. There's the first name variable, which I can then drag and drop onto the label and say something like text. And then if I go to print, there's a form tab here. I have both a database and a when printed field, so you can switch between those two areas to define what you need. And then I can type in whatever I want. So I'll change it to Sean. Or you know what? Kevin. There we go. So I type in Kevin. You can see it shows up on the label just like we expect. Okay. All right. Now the one other thing, let's see here. I want to show date stamps here. Now date stamps there is a wizard for. Say you need a reference to today's date, like an expiration date or a best by date. I could come in here and say best by, I'll call it best by. I can choose the format I want it to show up in. There's predefined formats in here. So say, for instance, I want it to be, a 4-digit year right there. All right, you can see a preview what it's going to look like. You can put in an offset if you want, a fixed offset of 90 days. Or you can choose what language you want it to display in. If you wanted to translate to Estonian or French, you can do that here. It's the only area in the software that will do a language translation for you. And then there's also options to use an internal printer clock, but of course that only works if the printer supports it. So make sure that that's available on the printer that you're using before you try to capitalize on it. Otherwise, that's it. Hit finish, creates my best by date, drag and drop as text. That date, of course, will update as the date changes. Now you might say, what happens if it's a timestamp? Well, that's where you don't use the wizard anymore. If you don't use the wizard, you can go into add, and you can do a number of different things. One, you can define some times that are predefined down here. Or if you get close to what you want, you can say, I want it customized, and you can customize exactly how it displays. You can do a customized date, a customized time, whatever you need. You can define it there. So a little bit more flexibility with timestamps when you come in here and do it without the use of the wizard. Unfortunately, the wizard itself kind of locks you into just a date stamp rather than a timestamp. Last but not least, the last big one I want to point out here is a counter variable. A counter is, of course, a number that just counts up, changes on every single label. Lots of people use it for serial numbers because it ensures that they're going to have a unique value on every label. So I'll call it serial. If you remember, I was talking about this in the old software. If you wanted to retain the fact that the number was saved when you closed the software, so you didn't want it to revert to some consistent value, you had to use a serial file. You don't have to do that anymore. You can it just does that automatically. Now, if you don't want to do that, there's other options, specifically in an advanced variable, to tell it to reset after you print or reset after a specific occurrence. But in this case, it will automatically define that this should automatically remember the last value it left off on. Now, say I need a value of something like 10,000, which is going to complain at me because my maximum number is set to 999. I bump it up. You get a little preview here of what the counter is going to count up through. You also get a minimum and a maximum range, so I could make a smallest value too, and then how it increments. So if I wanted to go up by 5, I could. And if I wanted to print once every 4 labels, so I could put a label on all 4 sides of my box before it incremented, I could do that there. Preview doesn't show that, but that's because it would very quickly make that preview pointless. So, but otherwise, say I want to increment by 1, every 1 label. I can hit next. I'm given options in here for the maximum length, prefix, suffix, padding, everything we've seen before. So say, for instance, want to precede it with NSPF, something like that. You can see it so there's NSPF and then a 5-digit number after it, whatever the counter is. Hit finish. Here's my counter. Drag and drop and say text. So there we go. Lots. Big number there, and every time we print a label, that number is going to count up for us, but that NSPF is always going to stay the same. So, all right, well, we did burn through all of our time here. Now, I think it's important to point out that, we really, unfortunately, were only able to scratch the surface on functionality here. We really talked about kind of the key points. Even in the data sources, I'd love to be able to cover formulas, which are basically another form of linked expressions, and advanced variables and table lookups, which are just another way to automatically select a value in a database. So lots of other options in here. Unfortunately, because of our time constraints, we're not able to get into those. And if need be, if it's something in the future that we see value in having a continuation here, maybe it's something we can consider. But this was a quick rundown of all the, I guess, major or key points that I think are important to show, especially in comparison to the old software. Really kind of focusing not only on the diversity that we have with these data sources and this drag and drop functionality, and this ability to quickly and easily reference and see what variables that you have in use and what you have at your disposal. And in addition to that, all the objects that are over here that now have these nice wizards that are available to help walk you through the addition of the fields, as well as the advanced properties if you want to get in there and do even more detailed and more advanced options in text fields than were even available in the old version of the software. So a lot more diversity here, and that's kind of what I really want to point out, that there's a lot more functionality here at your disposal, and there's a lot of things that make it a lot easier to use. You just have to kind of give a try to some of those wizards and see how they fit.